Ay, 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 canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegran cielito lindo los corazones. Hello, bienvenido a este programa. Si ustedes estaban esperando, ¿dónde ha estado Eduardo? ¿Qué pasó con él? Pues discúlpame por favor, porque yo he estado muy ocupado. Okay, so you're probably wondering to yourself, why is Eduardo, our fearless leader, why is he speaking Spanish? Why is he vestido or dressed in such a funny, ridiculous manner? Aha! Well, this shows what I've always suspected about you, my loyal fans. You're loyal fans, but you know nothing about fashion. Those of you who know me well know that I am a fashionista, that fashion is my life. And I'm proving it today by wearing this beautiful charro hat that I purchased just recently. I don't know why. So this morning I woke up and I said to myself, I must do a podcast with my new hat because I'm sure that all of my fans will appreciate it, right? Okay, so you say to yourself, huh? Why would we appreciate his wearing a charro hat today? So here's what happened to me. I'm sharing this with you. It shows to the inner workings of my mind. So I woke up and I said to myself, I'm going to do this program and I will discuss that. I will pretend that I'm celebrating the Cinco de Mayo. And then I will explain that the Cinco de Mayo is not really the Independence Day of Mexico. And I will tell them about 16 de Septiembre, which is the 16th of September for those of you who are not bilingual. And they will appreciate my great knowledge and insight into the history of Mexico, where I lived from the ages of 11 to 14. This time I'm telling you the truth. So, ironically, as I'm thinking this to myself, I said, wait a minute. This is the 16th of September. That's the truth. I said it to myself. Oh my God, Eduardo, this is the 16th of September. How did you happen to just be thinking about this on this day? And you know what? I do not know. It is one of those amazing coincidences, others of which I may share with you someday. Maybe even today. You could be lucky. So here we are. This is the 16 de Septiembre, which is the real Mexican Independence Day. And you say, well, why do we celebrate the Cinco de Mayo? Beats me, because the Cinco de Mayo was not really an independence day. The Cinco de Mayo was celebrating the fact that the French forces invading Mexico under the direction of Napoleon III, not Napoleon Bonaparte, but his nephew that many people think was not really his nephew. There was some hanky-panky going on, but I don't want to get into that right now because I do not to spread the rumors. But they invaded over in Cancun, right? I was just recently in Cancun, which is another story altogether, rather fishy, I must admit. So they invade, and off they walk, and the Mexicans came rushing to defend Mexico, and they stopped them in their tracks overnight. Then the next day, the French forces, they just marched right into Mexico City. But it was a great celebration because it was a great shot, a booster in the arm, as you say, to the Mexican army, as it were. And so today we celebrate that by drinking lots of drinks, which is really what they did after they found out they had not really stopped the French, so then they went back to drinking tequila because it was the only way they could salvage their sanity. So, that's the day we celebrate. But the real day that the Mexican government celebrates is the 16th of September, which was the day of the grito. Not the negrito, please, you racists out there, you're disgusting to me. And my dog, and my parrot. But I don't want to get into these animal husbandry issues today. But I'm not saying that my parrot and my dog are married. What is wrong with you? This is George again. The Senor Santos who came to us from New York. He is always here, but he is a welcome friend of this program. So, we'd always like to have a congressman. In this case, he's many different congressmen. We are very, very lucky to have him. But nonetheless, I tend to digress. You may have noticed that. So, what happened? The grito means the shout. And it was done by a Catholic priest. That's right. Catholic priests are troublemakers. And this guy, this Padre Hidalgo, was the biggest troublemaker of all, went out and started ringing church bells at dawn. It was midnight. He began ringing the bells and waking everybody up. And he said, what's going on here? He says, I'm here to shout. I said, well, couldn't you shout without ringing all the damn bells? No, I had to shout, Viva Mexico, start the revolution. And they did. And that was the beginning of the revolution, not against the French. This one was against the Spanish. Mexicans couldn't get along with anybody. Everybody tried to conquer them. They had a problem with these Mexicans, so stubborn. But nonetheless, That was the grito. That was the shout to start the War of Independence. And it was in 1810. That's all right, 1810. I forget when the Cinco de Mayo was, but it was around our Revolutionary War, because that's what happened. The French took advantage of our weaknesses with fighting against each other. They said, aha, we'll just go down there and ignore the Monroe Doctrine, and we will conquer Mexico. So you got these two things which are at odds with each other. People do not understand the difference between Cinco de Mayo and 16 de Septiembre. But the real 4th of July, as it were, by analogy, for Mexico is today, the 16 de Septiembre, and I am celebrating by wearing my new dudes. And I think I look pretty good. I know, you do too. You just don't want to admit it, especially my old friend, Mikey. He will never admit how good I look. But he should, because I look much better than he does, because he's an old man. He's 6 months older than I am. That's old. Okay, you know what? I'm going to give you guys a break. I'm going to just tell you real quick a little bit of family history, which you probably can turn off right now. But I lived in Mexico from the time I was 11 till the time I was 14. I lived there in 14 and a half. Till I went to school in Mexico, to the American high school, where my mother was also a teacher. And ironically, my mother had graduated from that same school. It's now a family tradition. So I lived there, and we lived there because my grandfather lived in Mexico. He lived in Mexico City. And at the time, my father, who was an Air Force lawyer, was stationed on an unaccompanied tour in Japan. So we went down to Mexico to be near my grandfather and my mother's family, also my uncles. They were all in business in Mexico. None of them were Mexicans. They were Irish, which is, I know, pretty much the same thing. It's Irishmen are Mexicans without the mariachis and the fancy hats. So I was there then. The interesting thing about the story is my grandfather, about whom I will discuss maybe sometime later, he knew Pancho Villa. He not only knew Pancho Villa, he sold him guns. He worked for a company, it was a mining engineering company in El Paso. And Villa needed guns for his revolution, and he bought them for my grandfather. And my grandfather used to tell me, he said, Eddie, he used to call me Eddie, he said, he's Francisco. He used to call him Francisco. Now, for those of you who are not bilingual, Pancho is a nickname for Francisco. My grandfather was also Francisco. It was Francis Savage. So they got along quite well, actually. And so my grandpa used to tell me stories. He's an Irishman. That's what they do. That's what I'm doing with you. Lucky you. So he used to me, and he said, when we would greet each other, I would say, "Ay, Francisco!" And he would say, "Ay, Francisco!" And then they would both laugh. I don't think that's so funny, but they did. So they had a camaraderie, because they were both named Francisco. And he said he was my favorite customer. I said, "Oh, because he killed people?" He said, No. You're a sick man, Eduardo. I'm a sick man? I'm only 12 years old. How can I be a man? He said, "Okay, but you're going to be a sick man." He said, "I would not be surprised if you grow up to be a lawyer and have your own podcast and tell people lies." And I said, "Well, I doubt it. I don't even know what a podcast is." This is in the 50s. They didn't even have podcasts then. I know you kids today think they always existed, just like telephones, but they didn't always exist. So when I was growing up, we didn't have telephones, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have cars. We lived in a cave. And yet I turned out okay. Yeah, I'm not crazy. Okay, that's a whole different story, and I don't even want to go there. And I don't appreciate that, George. You're a guest here. So he said, Villa, Francisco, my friend, he used to pay me in gold bars. And I said, "How did the rest of your customers pay?" He said, "They usually didn't pay me at all." Oh, okay. So then what happened was my grandfather got sent down to Monterrey with his company, Monterrey, Mexico, to take the place of a vice president who was on vacation. And the vice president who was on vacation says, "I'm not returning to Mexico. I've had it." And my grandfather was told, "You are now a permanent resident of Mexico." And I said, "Well, how did you feel about that, Grandpa?" And he said, "I did not like it one bit. I wanted to come back to Texas, which is where I am from." I said, "Well, why didn't you?" He says, "Because I had a wife and 5 children, that's why, you moron." And he was right. I was a moron. I'm not now, but I was then. So interesting story. Then there's a lot more. My grandfather knew all the revolutionaries. He knew all the presidents of Mexico up until really just before we got there, when Alemán was president of Mexico, followed by López Portillo. But I don't want to get into the whole history of Mexican politics, which I do actually know something about, primarily because of my grandfather. So, and there was one president called Chavez. And if you don't know the name Chavez as president, you should look him up, because he was a fascinating person. And then you see the war against the Cristianitos, and how they used to, my mother used to see them shoot people coming out of church, because it was a war against the Catholic Church, and she would see them actually shooting people coming out of church on Sundays when she was a little girl. This was Calles. Calles was president of Mexico. My grandfather was president of the Churubusco Country Club, which those of you who are from Mexico know that. And Calles would, every Sunday, would come to Churubusco to play golf, and my grandfather, who hated him because my grandfather was a devout Catholic, had to play golf with him. And this guy had only one hand. He had lost a hand in the revolution. He had a hook. I don't know how he played golf. Probably he just had somebody else hit the golf ball for him. That's what I do. And so anyway, so my mother tells the story that she ran up to him one time, and she was just a little bitty thing. And she said, "Oh, Mr. President, could I have?" She said, I was literally shaking. I was terrified of the man, but I handed him my autograph book, and I said, "Mr. President, could you give me your autograph?" And I said, "So what did you do?" She said, "He reached out and grabbed it out of my hand, scribbled something like that, and threw it back at me, and then got in the cart with, or not in the it had carts, whatever they did. They went off on a horse or some kind of thing to go play golf." So that's a little bit of why I'm sort of aware of and sensitive to these Mexican celebrations. I really wanted an excuse to wear this hat with this cool serape. And I know the colors don't exactly match, but hey, who are you to judge? I've seen how you judge, how you dress, especially you, George, but I'm talking to all the other people out there watching this thing. Yeah, I know there's nobody watching this thing. But if there were, I can assure you that they would have terrible fashion taste. So that's it today. It's a short one. Thanks be to God, I heard that. And anyway, it was a great shouting at you today, and you guys have a good weekend and enjoy the 16 de septiembre, which is today on a Saturday. So it's a double holiday. And with that, I'm going to say